Hi everybody, welcome back, sort of. So for the next 2 weeks, obviously you're aware, you will be working from home. Who knows what will happen after that? Hopefully you'll be back in school. Just to give you a little brief idea of what's going to happen with history then for the next 2 weeks is you're going to have two types of lessons. So basically 3 hours we'll ask you to spend, which would be our 3 lessons that we'd have in school normally. So they'll either be these recorded lessons like this one, where you just play it at your convenience, possibly when you would have a lesson anyway would be a good time, or we'll upload some work to Google Classroom depending on how far these videos take us. So that's the idea really for the next 2 weeks. Depending on what happens after that, if we are still off, then we'll do live lessons, or we will aim to do live lessons properly. So we'll obviously ask you to log in to Google Meet, and we'll go through lessons properly, where we can talk to each other and you can ask questions and things. Now obviously it's really important that you know that you can ask questions anyway, so while you're working through these lessons, please make sure that if you're not sure about anything, you send us a quick email. So let's get started on this first lesson then. Alright, so we're going to look at what did Europe look like after World War One. As you can see on this picture on the screen, it is pretty devastated, and this was quite a common scene all across really eastern France on the Western Front, as most of the fighting, as you know, took place in the trenches. Lots of the farmland and the just the land really down the east coast of France was destroyed, and it looked a little bit like this, as well as obviously the human life. So I'll talk quickly through a little bit of context, and then we'll set you up on the Treaty of Versailles task for this lesson. Okay, so you can clearly see that lots of areas have been destroyed. It wasn't just buildings though, obviously there's famine, and as we've talked about in Revolution in Germany in class, people were eating animals out of the zoo, and obviously the Russian Revolution took place as well in 1917 that we've looked at as well. All really directly linked to the damages and the chaos caused by World War One. So we've asked Germany's king to abdicate, or the Americans did, or the Allies really. But part of the deal was that if the German king abdicates or steps down from his power, then Germany won't be treated so harshly at the end of the war. So just keep that in mind for later on when we look at the Treaty of Versailles. The Germans felt pretty much promised that if the king abdicates and they set up a new democratic government, then they will not be treated so harshly. And you can make your own mind up at the end of this session if you think that was fair or not. All right, we'll also have a little bit of a look at democracy and dictatorship in the next online lesson after this. All right, but World War One clearly has destroyed the landscape physically, but also politically. So we end up with a situation like this. Just to recap where we are in Russia. So following the end of the war, Russia looks a little bit like this. So we've got this new Bolshevik leader, Lenin, in charge. Remember after the Russian Revolution where they killed the Russian royal family? He is beginning to create this new USSR. Okay, so a communist dictatorship basically. But they have also suffered hugely. They probably lost more men than any other country in this war. So they probably have a right to feel quite angry about that. And they're also trying to recover. So the revolution is essentially a new Russia, and it keeps Russia pretty much out of the European picture for a little while. They will play a big part coming soon, but for now Russia are busy recovering from the war and the revolution. So in Germany then, which is probably a little bit more important, let's see what's happening. So really quickly then, this guy you can see, his name is Friedrich Ebert. He becomes the new leader of Germany, or its president, replacing the Kaiser. So Germany is no longer a monarchy. It doesn't have a king in charge. It has a government. So a little bit like in our country where we've got a prime minister. Ebert basically becomes the first elected leader of this new German democracy. And democracy just simply means for now that the people vote for the leaders. The people have a say. Whereas obviously in a monarchy, the king is the king by birth. So that's quite a big change for the German people, but clearly after the war and the devastation, it might be worth a try. So it's a republic, as we've said, that is brand new. No one's ever lived in a republic in Germany. No one. This is really, there's been a monarchy in Germany for about the last 2,000 years or so. So really, this is brand new for the German people. Now, remember we've already looked a couple of weeks ago in class at the debt from the war. They're in 150 billion marks worth of debt. Now, just to put that into a bit of context for you, Germany really only made or earned about 10 billion a year. So you can see how big that debt was for Germany, that they will only be bringing in 10 billion on good times, but yeah, they've got this debt of 150 billion that they need to deal with. That's going to cause Ebert some problems, isn't it? He's going to have to raise taxes. These people are going to lose their jobs. The economy is going to be devastated. Never mind the fact that lots of these soldiers and men did not come home. So there's going to be all sorts of problems in Germany, as we've seen, and as you will see over the next few weeks and months. So the riots, no doubt about it, there's riots, there's starvation, and all this anger in Germany of their husbands and brothers and uncles who didn't come home, and all of the devastation is really close to having a revolution in Germany, just like in Russia. And the Russians supported this because there was a communist revolution very early on in Ebert's reign called the Spartacus Uprising. It was pretty much a joke, and it got put down really quickly. But the point is, Germany is on the edge after this war, and this guy that you're looking at, Ebert, is going to have to try and sort it. Alright, so there are plots everywhere. There's also massive death and casualties from World War One, just the same as every other country as well. So that's just a really brief context of what was happening in Germany. In France, we are led by this guy, the Tiger, his nickname is, Georges Clemenceau. Now, he hates Germany. He is absolutely determined that Germany will be wiped off the face of the earth in the Treaty of Versailles. So you have to decide yourself at the end of this lesson, or this session, whether you agree with Clemenceau or not. But he absolutely hates Germany. And to be fair, he's probably scared of Germany as well, because remember, France is on the border of Germany. So he probably feels a little bit vulnerable to more German aggression if he doesn't deal with Germany now. So Georges Clemenceau is in charge. And France has obviously been devastated, like we've just said, and we've seen the photographs that most of France and the eastern side of France was destroyed because of the shells and the artillery and things like that. So they want basically Germany to pay for this, the damages, and that's going to be a massive part of the Treaty of Versailles that you'll look at in a minute. All right, they also have suffered massive deaths and casualties. You know what it was like in the trenches. We've seen it. We've seen the pictures. We've looked at the videos and we've heard the stories. France also suffered significantly in this war too. So he wants revenge and he wants Germany punished. You just keep that in mind when we get to this negotiation, because we are going to meet in Versailles. Britain, France, America are going to get together and they're going to decide what to do with Germany. And really that's what today's session is all about. So here we are in Britain. This is our Prime Minister. His name is David Lloyd George. Okay, he is a bit of a strange character, really. He wants Germany punished, but he also doesn't want Germany punished. He is convinced that a strong Germany will be good to trade with. We've had an awful lot about trade in Britain in the last few years, haven't we? It's always been a problem. Of course, it's important that countries are able to trade with each other. So David Lloyd George is in a bit of a difficult position. Britain suffered hugely with the hunger, the deaths, the casualties. The people want revenge. The people are really angry. The people who haven't had their fathers and husbands and brothers and uncles and everyone else to come home, they want him to be punished, or Germany to be punished. David Lloyd George is well aware of this, and there is a general election coming up soon, so he's going to have to try and please the people, but also in the background he doesn't really want to punish Germany too much. So you keep that in mind as well when we get onto the Treaty of Versailles task in a minute. Alright, he's also a little bit worried about Russia and communism spreading across Europe, and he thinks that if Germany's a little bit stronger, it could be more of a sort of buffer zone or a plug really to stop communism spreading. That's another reason maybe in the back of his mind why he wants Germany to be a little bit stronger. So we've got these three guys. We've got France, Clemenceau, who wants to destroy Germany. We've got David Lloyd George, who wants to punish them but not really punish them. And then we've got the USA, who, as you know, got involved in the war pretty late on, but significantly because of them, the Allies won. So Woodrow Wilson is the president of America. He wants Europe to be rebuilt. He wants a strong Europe with everybody working together. And again, probably to stop the spread of communism. He is a key part of these post-war negotiations. And remember, America are the strongest country in the world, militarily, economically. So basically, what the Americans want or say is generally going to happen in 1918. But he's also a fairly reasonable character. He is realistic. He's an idealist, which perhaps isn't always a good thing when tensions are so high, but he thinks it's possible that Europe can rebuild itself and recover and move on and be stronger than ever. So he comes up with this idea about the League of Nations. So essentially what this is a load of countries are in this group, this club if you like, And instead of fighting, when they have issues with each other or problems, they come to the League of Nations and they talk and they sort it all out. You can see what I mean by an idealist. Basically going to talk through their problems and never have another war ever again. So the League of Nations is quite a good idea, really, and it intends to bring peace to Europe forever. One problem with that, and you can keep this in mind as you go forward, as a German perspective, Germany are not allowed to join the League of Nations. It's one part of their punishment. So basically, decisions can be made about Germany and affecting Germany, but Germany are not going to be able to have a say. That's just maybe a little thing, but when you see what comes in a minute, you might understand why the German people are quite angry, and people like young Adolf Hitler get quite angry with the situation after the war. Okay, so on these next few screens, we've got a couple of questions really that obviously if we were in class we'd have a bit of a debate and discussion, but as we are in this situation, just yourself, if you put the questions in your book or on your document if you're writing or typing, and just give yourself a few thoughts, a couple of bullet points on what you think, what you might have said if we were saying this together. So who's to blame for the war? So pause the video and maybe give yourself a couple of comments on who you think really is to blame for this World War One. Was it Britain, France or Germany? Maybe you could draw an arrow, and if you think on the right hand side is the most to blame, put which country you think there, down to the least to blame. Maybe you think they're equal, I don't know. So you just pause the video and you just make a decision on that one, and then we move on to the next. Okay, so who caused the most damage then is the next question. Again, you put your Germany, Britain or France along that line somewhere on the right hand side, the most damage, and on the left hand side the least. Maybe a couple of bullet points or ideas on where you think they should go. Okay, and the next one, so who do you think lost the most men? Again, you can see the green arrow, the higher or more across to the right hand side, the more men you think they've lost. Now, I've just kind of told you a minute ago that Russia lost the most men, so they definitely should go to the end. But just think about logically where most of the fighting took place and things like that for this one. It's a bit more difficult, this question, because normally I would tell you and we'd have a bit of a chat about it. But just for now, sort of roughly where you think. And keep in mind, though, that these lost men equal anger and sadness at home. Everybody lost lots of men. All right, so then let's think about this. The potential to fix things. Who is in a position to fix this post-war world? So you put the countries where you think. Think about a little context that we started this session with. So what was happening in Russia, in France, in Britain and Germany. Who really is in a position strong enough to fix the problems of post-war Europe? Okay. And the next one. Who would gain the most from a peace settlement? So if we could come up with some agreement to bring peace to Europe, who do you think is in such a state or such a bad position they might benefit from a peace settlement? Basically, they are going to gain the most out of peace. Again, on the arrow, closest to the right hand side, that is the country you think will benefit the most, and then to the left hand side, the least. Okay. So that is a little bit of an idea, just some context really. Now we'll look at the Treaty of Versailles in a little bit more detail. Okay, it's a really important part of modern history, certainly in the 20th century. Many historians believe that the Treaty of Versailles is the reason why the Nazis rose to power. Okay, so as we go through the next few weeks and we get back to school and we go on to World War II, we'll be able to ask that question, and then you'll be able to answer that question yourself at the end. Is this the root of the rise of the Nazis? So we call the big three America, Britain and France. They are the three that are going to make the decisions on what happens. So obviously World War I ended in November the 11th, 1918. So here we are on the 28th of June, 1919. We're going to get together to decide what to do with Germany. How much should they be punished? Should they be punished at all? Keeping in mind everything that we've done today so far, you'll make those decisions yourself, and then we'll obviously look at what actually happened. So we've got Georges Clemenceau, remember, who hates Germany and wants them punished so much that they could never possibly attack France again. We've got David Lloyd George, who wants them punished because there's an election coming up and needs to look strong at home, but also is well aware that a strong Germany would be good for trade. And we've got the idealist Woodrow Wilson, who wants everyone to just get on, and we'll talk about our problems, as well as the fact he is the most powerful man in the world, so his opinion matters a lot. So before we start this, I want you to just pause this screen a little bit and have a quick read of the 4 yellow boxes you can see on the screen. They just summarise a little bit the feeling and what you need to think about when making your decision on the following options. The Treaty of Versailles is a negotiation. It is going to be a treaty that will punish Germany, but how far and how harshly, that entirely depends on Britain, France and America. They have to agree, obviously, but remember, they all want different things from this treaty. Now, if we were in class, we'd do this very differently, but as for now, this is sort of the best way I think we can still do it, where you can get to think and argue maybe with yourself. So we've got Britain, France and America, the big three. Germany is here on the screen. Remember the casualties and the chaos and the fighting and rebellions that is going on in Germany. One thing I will give you a little bit of a heads up on is that although Germany is going to be at the Treaty of Versailles, they are going to have zero say in it. Which, think about that, if you're Ebert and you've been promised a little bit, if the king abdicates, you won't be punished so harshly. Perhaps you could even get involved in this sort of negotiation. Then you turn up at Versailles and you are not allowed in the meeting or the negotiation. That is one way that's going to upset the Germans straight away, isn't it? And it's certainly going to upset Ebert. So let's get through this. Let's pretend now we're in the Treaty of Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, just outside of Paris. And we'll see what we're going to do with Germany. So now that you've read those things, let's carry on with this video. Okay, so Article 1, the first thing we're going to talk about is who should we blame? So do you think, if Britain, France and America, that we should totally blame Germany? It's all their fault, everyone blames Germany, they started the war. So think back a little bit when you're making this decision. Think fairly, did Germany start the war? Did they shoot Archduke Franz Ferdinand? That was the alliance system, wasn't it? Or do you think, yes, they did, because they were building this empire to try and rival the British Empire? Their military was being built. They were building the dreadnoughts and their navy. There was a huge challenge to the British Empire. And obviously, that causes tension. So you decide what you think you should do. Maybe pause the video and make a few notes and bullet points on what you think. Should they be blamed for this war? Now, remember, if they're blamed for the war, just like if you're in a car accident or something, the person at fault will have to pay the compensation, won't they? So just remember, if you decide that Germany is to be blamed for this war and every single person who died in this war and all the damage, then they're going to have to pay for it as well. Okay, so when you're ready to make some notes, just pause the screen while you do it, pause the video, and then press play when you're ready to go on. So should we insert this clause? I'll be interested to see what you say when I look at your work. But Germany is responsible for all the damages of the war. That will be Article number 1. Secondly, let's think about the size of Germany's army. Now, at the time, Germany had an army of about 11.5 million soldiers. So do we think that we should do something with their army and their air force and their navy? Remember, if you're France, you probably have a really strong opinion on this. If you are English or British, you probably have an opinion, but maybe less harshly than the French. And then the Americans, well, you know, ideally every country should be able to defend themselves. So you decide what you think we should do with this, okay? So should we insert a clause in this Treaty of Versailles to stop German aggression in the future? Their armed forces should be removed and limited. If you agree, what numbers should we do? Should we say that German army should be set to 10 million, 5 million, 2 million? You decide yourself what you think. Bear in mind, you want an opinion from France, Britain and America. Okay, so maybe you could argue with yourself a little bit as if you were one of the three, or as if you're all three really, and then come to a final decision yourself. 2.2 of this clause, should we allow them to have an air force? And if we should, how many planes should we allow them to have? Is it a human right to be able to defend your country? Or do they not deserve it? Are they too dangerous to have any sort of army? So pause this page when you're ready, carry on. Right, so Article 3, the size of the Navy, similarly to the Air Force and the actual army. If we think they should be allowed some sort of Navy, how many battleships and how many submarines? Again, make your decision based on an argument between the big three. Okay, and then we'll move on. Pause it, and then when you're ready, press play. So Article 4, the next thing to think about is the Rhineland. So you can see on this map that the Rhineland is on the border of Germany and France. This area has had German soldiers in it, and it is obviously really close to France. So the French might say we need to demilitarize the Rhineland. That means take away all of the army so that France can sleep at night, really. They're not in any fear that the army will move into France. Also, that this Rhineland should be split up as well. So do you think that the Rhineland should be demilitarized and all German troops removed? Next, and really importantly, keeping in mind that they are 150 billion marks in debt already, should Germany pay reparations? It's just another word for compensation, really. Should they pay reparations for the damages caused in the war? You know, they've got to rebuild the buildings, the towns, the cities that have been blown up, as well as create jobs and things like that. So, do you think that Germany should have to pay reparations? It depends on what you've said for the guilt, really, if you think, yep, they are to blame. So, we'll insert the clause, as Germany is responsible for war damage, they should pay for it. So now I need you to really think about how much should they really pay towards the recovery in Europe. You come up with a figure yourself, maybe have that argument between the big three, remembering what France, Germany and Britain and America think about this situation. Also remember though that Germany haven't got any money, alright, so you don't want to possibly ask for something that you're not going to get. So how much in billions should Germany have to pay back? So then Article 6, the next thing to think about at this treaty is Germany has got many territories all around the world as well as in their own country. Particularly their empire they were building in Africa. They've got quite a few African colonies as well. And obviously that brings resources, minerals, riches and things like that. So do we think that Germany's empire is too big and too powerful and we need to take their empire and split it between the victors? Alright, so should we take Germany's empire, basically break the empire down, break it apart and make Germany powerless? So pause the screen, have a little think with your three colleagues and then make a decision. Okay, so Article 7 is this new League of Nations that Woodrow Wilson has created. Do we want Germany to be in the League of Nations? Now, I've kind of ruined this one already by telling you they weren't allowed to be in it. But one of the things that Clemenceau might have said is that Germany should not be part of it because they'll just talk their way out of blame. It's very possible they might do. So you decide if you'd let them in or not. Obviously, you know that they didn't in real life, but that for this task, you can still have a little discussion with your colleagues there, Britain, France and America. So pause, and then when you're ready, move on. So this next one's quite interesting. Now, Austria-Hungary, as you will be aware, was part of the alliance system, and it was the whole Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austrian throne, that was killed, remember? And the alliance was that Germany would help Austria. Now, Germany and Austria, their empire and their relationship goes way, way, way back. It's a little bit like England and Scotland, really. So they're joined by land and a little border, but they generally are very, very close in culture and history and everything else. And they're quite dangerous working together because the Austrian Empire is quite a big empire as well. So do we need to split Austria and Germany up? So the word that we'd use is Anschluss. So that just basically means to split them up. So should this alliance be broken up? Bear in mind, you could argue this is one of the main reasons for the war. So that'll be your thought process. Break this up, less chance of further wars. Okay, so when you're done with that, we'll have a little look at what actually happened in the Treaty of Versailles. See how far off you were. Were you too harsh? Were you not harsh enough? It'll just be quite interesting, and then we'll have some feedback when we do get back on what you thought about this. So here are the actual terms. Now we've put, we could use an acronym of BRAT to help you remember these terms. So B, blame, R, reparations, A, army, T, territory. So you can stop this video or pause the video and read through these things yourself. This is essentially what was agreed. Really quickly, they were blamed for the war. Okay, totally, everything about it, deaths, damage, everything, causes, Germany was totally blamed. They were asked to pay reparations of £6.6 billion. Now, you know, they're talking nearly, I would imagine that would be somewhere around the 80 to 100 billion marks. added to the 150 billion marks debt that they're already in from the war. So you can see that that was a real big problem for Germany and the economy. The army was reduced, and it's interesting. It will be interesting to see what you thought and what you decided. To 100,000 men, no tanks, only 6 battleships, no submarines, no air force, and the Rhineland was in fact demilitarized. Okay, and then territory-wise, they lost 10% of their population. So one day you were German, the next day you were Polish, and so forth. And that is going to be one of the features of Hitler's plans, is he takes those lands back from Poland later on. They lose 13% of their European territory, 50% of their iron, and 15% of their coal. Bear in mind, they're starving, struggling, angry anyway. We're asking them to pay this debt of reparations of 6.6 billion, and then we're going to take away the ways that they could help and pay it by taking their iron off them and their coal reserves. So perhaps you can see why the Germans were a little bit unhappy with this. All right, so they've lost 11 of their colonies in Africa, and you can see the rest there yourself. So this, on the bottom right of this graphic, you'll see a word diktat. All right, it's just a German word that basically just means dictated peace. So the Treaty of Versailles was given to Ebert, and Ebert was told to sign it. Now, we could have a little chat if we were in class together, but you can also have this thought yourself. Did he have a choice? Did Ebert have a choice? If he said no, I guess the Allies would have just invaded Germany and finished them off once and for all. But back home, this is probably not going to make Ebert very popular, is it? This really is humiliating for the Germans. So your task really now, the main thing for today, is in your Google Classroom, you'll see this document. Can you just open that up as a Google slide or document, or whatever it is you want to do it on, and annotate around each of those 4 boxes how or why they would upset the German people. So you probably need to think about some things like humiliated. You might want to think about being vulnerable. You might want to think about how this was unfair or angry. All of these things, basically, try and put yourself in the position as a normal German person in the street who hasn't really been involved, isn't a politician, isn't a leader. They just open up the newspaper on the 29th of June and they see this. How would you feel? And try and break it down into those 4 categories. Why? What would blame do? How would blame upset them? How would the reparations upset them, or why would it upset them? And the army, and then territory as well. So that's the main element of today, really. Take your time with it. Obviously, you can rewind this video if you've missed things or if I've gone a little bit too quick. And as always, remember, please just ask some questions if you're not sure about anything. But it is important to understand this Treaty of Versailles as a sort of trigger for what comes next as we go on to the causes of World War II and the events and the rise of the Nazis. It's very clear that it all stems back to this Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so take care, stay safe, and we'll see you for the next session. And a reminder, please get in touch quickly if you're not sure or you're struggling to access any of the resources. Okay, thank you and see you soon. Bye.